You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Making Tracks, which isn't 1, 2, 3, it's 2, 3, 4. I'm your co-host Mark Mulcaster, and joining me this week, as always, is my brother in the Force, Mr. Mark Newbold. Mr. Newbold, how are you doing, buddy?
Oh, very well. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I haven't got one for you, but I'll save it for next week. How's it all going?
It's going all right. It's been a nice little week. Some interesting things cropping up in the news and what have you, and eager to talk about. How about you? How's things with yourself and your Star Wars world?
This week, I've been tidying my collection room.
Yeah.
Where I'm sitting now, there's a desk next to me, an old coffee table we've had in the family for like 40-odd years that's just got piles of Star Wars stuff in it. So I've been going through it, sorting out what needs reviewing, what needs to go up in the collection. And last week, went to see Ash at the Scala in London and had a brilliant night. Fantastic. They're always brilliant, seeing Ash. So that was great. 4 tracks off the new album. Graham Coxon from Blur got up with them. It was a belter of a night. So looking forward to seeing them again, hopefully next month. And as you say, loads of Star Wars news. In fact, should we just get straight into it? Because
let's dive right in like a Nautilin going home.
I love that analogy. That is fantastic. Right, first things first. Mark Hamill was talking about Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. He gave a fantastic quote. I shall read a little bit of what was said in the Hollywood Reporter. They basically said, what do you think about the idea that Lucasfilm might continue to make a Luke Skywalker without you, i.e. using AI, i.e. AI? I know what I mean. And Hamill said, what you're asking about is so hard to contemplate. Are we going to have something in our wills that comment on that saying, I don't want this done? I have enough trouble trying to deal with the jobs that I do have than to start speculating about the future. There's so many questions about AI that haven't been answered. We'll see how it plays out. And then the Hollywood Reporter very smartly asked about his return in The Mandalorian. And Mark says, the reason I did The Mandalorian was that Luke had a beginning and an end. There was no middle. It was like making a trilogy about James Bond. I knew you'd appreciate that. Yeah. And a young boy who first became aware of the Secret Service and wanted to be a part of it. Part 2 is him training to be an agent. Part 3 is earning his license to kill. The end. No From Russia with Love, no Dr. No or Goldfinger. You never got to see Luke as a master Jedi at the peak of his powers. He was the most idealistic character in that series. He was someone who would take adversity and double down and come back and counter his setbacks. We didn't see any of that. So when I got the chance, I thought, geez, this is wonderful. I think Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, boy, do they get Star Wars. They get it. They're speaking the same language that George did in the way that I questioned in the sequels. So we know that Mark, at the time, seemed to have a little bit of trouble dealing with the whole theme of what Luke was up to and what Luke was doing in the sequel trilogy. And now, 8 years removed from The Last Jedi, he's kind of returned to that conversation. So what do you think of what Mark has said here? Do you think it makes sense, what he's saying? Do you agree? Do you think he's kind of falling back onto some of the old thoughts that he might have had in the past now that he kind of is beyond Star Wars? What do you make of what Hamill has said?
Yeah, I think what he said kind of makes perfect sense to me. And it was a good point, really. There is this thing, isn't it, that, and I think this is why a lot of fans love Star Wars Legends, is the fact that we see Luke, or we read about Luke, I should say, in his prime, as it were, in his prime as a Jedi Master, still learning. He doesn't know everything about the Force, but he's learning, he's developing, he's growing stronger, and we're seeing him kick butt left, right, and center all across the galaxy. So to even see like a tiny amount of that in this Disney era, I think it's fantastic. And what's nice is obviously we then get to see him go on and kind of have his Yoda moments where he is imparting his wisdom as a Jedi to Grogu, and that as well, obviously, as well as Rey. But Ben, like you said, that is at the very end of his life, and you could see that things have definitely changed at his outlook. Would you say he trained Grogu? I suppose he kind of did. Bit of an odd one, isn't it? Because like, Grogu kind of feels like he didn't really need training as such. He just kind of needed reawakening or reminding. going back to Mark's first point, really, I mean, obviously, I don't really know what agreements, say, Mark and Carrie and Harrison have got in terms of what they can use their likenesses for in Star Wars going forward. If it's just, their likenesses in, say, like a computer game, how does it translate into, like you said, AI and future films and stuff? But, for me, somebody who's very much around AI, all the pros and the cons that are coming with that, right now, I think it would be a massively big, bold swing for Lucasfilm to go down that route. I still think the best thing to do for the longevity of a character is to recast if they need to
tell the stories that we would have got if Lucas had gone back to those characters back in the early 90s. Now, okay, we know the tech is great, but there's a certain reticence, I think, these days. I think even Lucasfilm seem to be stepping back a little bit from that and using the tech for other things. So Hamill's there talking about products. So if they are going to make new Luke Skywalker products going forward, but they recast tomorrow and we get a new younger actor turning up to play Luke in the same way that Alden Ehrenreich played Han Solo, when you read Star Wars comics, Han Solo looks like Harrison Ford. He doesn't look like Alden. He did in the adaptation of Solo.
Yeah.
But everything else, it looks like Ford. And even if they went back to that time period, the character would probably look like Harrison.
I think if there was a more continued use of Alden, I think if it was like, as Mark's already brought up upon, if it was almost like the big announcement was, this is your big three, they wheel out new actors for Luke, for Leia, and for Han, then yes, I think at that point, there is a marketing pivot. And the artwork and everything else, you start seeing like retro versions of some of these figures, maybe with their likenesses on. That, for Hasbro, that's like a license to print money.
Yeah.
I know. Suddenly we could go back and tweak the likenesses so that whoever is now playing Luke is actually now represented in all these other figures as well. Yes, I think that's what would be the case. So if Alden had gone on and potentially done 2 or 3 films or a spin-off series, then I think you would see more likeness towards Alden. But because it was that one film in time, that's probably why. Because otherwise, it would be a bit of a weird thing, wouldn't it? You've got Mark Hamill's likeness on all the product, but then you go and see a Star Wars film and it's some other chap playing Luke Skywalker. There'd be a disconnect there, which wouldn't make sense.
And the other part of Hamill's comments, really bigging up and praising Favreau and Filoni, saying they really get it. You could, and I'm sure certain quarters of the fandom could read that as a bit of a dig on Rian Johnson, maybe possibly, less so on JJ, but it feels like the issue rose with what Rian Johnson wanted to do with Luke. Do you perceive it like that? I don't. I think he's just given a big thumbs up to Favreau and Filoni.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Everything can be read one way or the other. He's not really kind of throwing too much shade on Rian Johnson about. JJ gets away with it because he didn't do anything with Luke. Luke's right at the end, and then he comes back as a Force ghost. And by that point, it's like, well, we've got to maybe undo a little bit of what's gone on in The Last Jedi. You look at the tonal change between Luke in Last Jedi and then Luke in that one scene in Rise of Skywalker, it's like 2 totally different characters. It feels like somebody's written Luke Skywalker having seen Force Awakens and has not seen or watched The Last Jedi.
It does make you wonder if he had have had the whole trilogy and what would he have done with Luke. We will never know because reboots and remakes aren't a Star Wars thing. But what is a Star Wars thing is Oscar Isaac was in the sequel trilogy. And he was asked recently whilst promoting his new Guillermo del Toro film Frankenstein whether or not he would think about coming back to Star Wars in Starfighter alongside his former Drive co-star Ryan Gosling. And his quotes were, and we must clarify, said with a hint of sarcasm. He said, Star Wars, right? We'll see. I'm ready for it. You let me know when. So a little bit of sarcasm in his voice. But then Liam Neeson, until a week before Obi-Wan Kenobi came out, was saying, I'm not going to be in Star Wars. I don't do TV. I only do film. So who knows? There's every chance that Poe Dameron could turn up in a Starfighter film. It's only set 5 years after Rise of Skywalker. And we are now in real life 6 years past the Rise of Skywalker. So what do you think? He's just playing the game, isn't he?
I think he's playing the game. I suppose if they can keep it under wraps, and that's one big reveal that he's in it, that would be cool. Of many of the characters from the sequel trilogy, Poe has generally come across quite positively with all fans. There's nothing about him that you could kind of say is contentious. He is what he is. So I would like to see him. I'd like to see Oscar Isaac back. I think Poe was a cool character. I really liked him. In fact, I pretty much wear one of his costumes for Rebel Legion. So he can't have been doing too much bad. And the question would be, he must have been promoted, you'd think, or obviously we don't really know what's going on with the government kind of issues now in this time period. So could he be a general, or could it be, somebody promoted higher up into some, New Republic kind of hierarchy? I don't know. You think about Force Awakens as like you throw away the established government and then what's left? surely you'd think there'd be some kind of designated survivor backup plan for the New Republic. Because if they're moving all these, like the local government around all these different planets, you'd think that maybe there's people, key personnel, kept in backup just in case something bad happens, like ship gets kind of wiped out. So, yeah, I mean, obviously we don't know. Hopefully it'll be interesting to see what happens and what transpires.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to see him come back. And if he did, it does feel like, given that we know Daisy is supposed to be coming back in either a single film or a trilogy, no idea on when or what the status on that is at the moment. There's plenty of rumours floating around, but nothing official. And also, John Boyega came back. I don't think that will be a huge surprise because he has talked about Star Wars an awful lot in the time that he's been saying, I'm done with Star Wars. So I don't think it would be a huge surprise if he came back. But Oscar Isaac, when it was all done, said, yeah, I'll come back if I need a new house. But now...
I was going to say, that's exactly what he said, wasn't it?
So if he did come back, I think that would be a very pleasant surprise. But just looking tonally at what we imagine Starfighter's going to be, and no real idea on what that storyline is quite yet, other than the vaguest hints that have been put out there, it does kind of feel with a title like Starfighter and Poe being the Wedge Antilles of his era, that might be a perfect fit.
I'm Brian Herring, BB-8 puppeteer, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. That'll learn you.
So last week saw the HasLab latest project, the Star Wars HasLab Republic Gunship, arrive. It needed 8,000 orders. It finally landed on 9,776. Great news for anybody who collects HasLab, but also sad news if you were hoping it would reach the first stretch tier because it landed 220 vol short. Or did it? Actually, it didn't because there were international figures yet to be added. That brought the total to 10,541, which means the first tier was reached. And Coleman Trebor is going to arrive in the vintage collection. And so at least we got one of the stretch tiers for the figures. Hopefully the other two, Stacey Tin and Aegon Kolar, will arrive in some form or format one day down the line. But Mark, what do you make of this? It made it. It didn't look like it was going to make it at all.
No,
Good Morning Tatooine last week were talking about it and they were convinced it wasn't going to make that target. It had a mad, crazy late rush and got over the line and it reached the stretch tier. So actually, in the end, it was quite the success, wasn't it?
Quite a success, yeah. I mean, you wonder how many people are going to end up maybe lumbered with 2 or 3 different versions of this. They're the fans of the HasLab and who want these larger vehicles. They really want them. And, some people are very much like, well, if it means I can get one for myself and then sell one on later on. Sometimes it's difficult. We've both done it where we haven't backed the HasLab and then it's come out and kind of gone, oh, it does look pretty good. I'm thinking like the Ghost for one. But at the same time, we both brought the Razor Crest. I think we both did. Sold those on.
You say about the Ghost, and the Ghost is the weirdest one because I've got lots of different versions of the Ghost in different formats and really fancied that. And then when I saw it, Steve Evans actually unboxed one and put it all together and it looked phenomenal. Even though I've got a whole top floor of the house for Star Wars, I haven't got room for it. And so I moved it on and bought the Jazzwares one, and I barely got room for that. But, by the by. But then seeing this gunship, like you say, it's a beautiful piece. The working elements of it are fantastic. I can see this being out there in secondary market for sure.
Yeah, I can see the appeal to this. I was fairly convinced it probably wasn't likely to get close. But then when it kind of got close, I was like, yeah, there will be people who will just try and push us over the line. And it's nice of it. It's gone beyond that first tier, just because otherwise it feels like a little bit annoying. And you do always sometimes wonder, don't you, with these tiers, the cost of producing a couple of figures, if you don't get to that second or third tier, would it really matter if you went, do you know what, let's put them out either separately or as part of the chosen few who did back Republic Gunship?
It's a good fallback position, though, isn't it, on that point? Yeah. Because it's part of this whole Return to Geonosis program that Hasbro have got going for next year. So that will sit right in the centre of that. And there's plenty of figures in and around that era and that story and plot point. But like you say, the 2 figures that didn't happen, Aegon and Stacey Tin, you've got to think at some point they would want to put them out in the vintage collection because that will just complete that set. So there's a logic and a relevance. If it hits the stretch tier, great. But you've had to plonk out all that money for the ship. Yeah. Not everyone's prepared or able to do that. But then your general, waggle the air quotes, run-of-the-mill Star Wars Hasbro collector who gets the vintage collection will probably be able to quite happily go and buy Aegon Kolar and Stacey Tin at a later date.
At that point, if they've basically done the tooling and it's pretty much ready to go, just do it. I mean, I suppose they could put him into another pack or something, maybe. That's possibly where it could go. What do you reckon the future is for the HasLab? I mean, because obviously they've only had one project that hasn't reached its first goal. Was it 2?
2, yeah. All the vintage collection ones have made it, but 2 Black Series ones didn't. Reva's lightsaber and the Rancor,
Oh, yeah, of course, Reva's lightsaber.
Yeah, people forget about that one. The Rancor was the most insane one because The HasLab finished the week before Book of Boba Fett's final episode came out with a Rancor. Okay, you would kind of think that would make more sense in the vintage collection, but it's not big enough to justify. And we were going for the Jedi Rancor, not the Rancor that you see in Book of Boba Fett. But nevertheless, the two things not gelling either told you that someone somewhere didn't get the Cliff Notes, or somebody at Lucasfilm didn't think to go, hey guys, why don't you just put it back a week? Because we've got this really cool episode coming out that features a Rancor that might just make people go, oh man, I forgot how cool those things are. Let's buy it.
Exactly.
So it didn't quite gel.
So what do you reckon's next for HasLab? What would you like to see?
Oh, there's loads I'd love to see. I don't know what the next initial one is. I'd like to think a sandcrawler's down there somewhere, a remote control sandcrawler. More like the Attack of the Clones one, really, with all the different levels inside, like the Macquarie painting you saw in the Illustrated Star Wars universe. That would be gorgeous.
Yes.
Something along those lines. They're never going to be able to do a full-size Tantive before, and they have done the corridor, but maybe cockpit dioramas, so something like that, or the Rebel briefing room from Return of the Jedi, more set-based than ship-based. Lego's just done a Death Star, so if they ever did something along the lines of a Death Star, they can't build the whole thing, of course, but they could build portions of it, maybe a trash compactor set or something like that. I think it's more locations than vehicles to the scale we want. It's 20 years since we had the BMF Millennium Falcon.
I was going to say, we haven't had a Falcon for a long time.
We haven't. From what I understand, even that's not quite big enough, so maybe a fully scaled Millennium Falcon. I mean, that would be a big beast.
That would be big. But also, you kind of think that's the kind of thing that you would pretty much bet your farm on it reaching at least, the first two tiers. If it doesn't happen next year, I mean, surely that's their 50th anniversary. I would bite the bullet on that one.
I think I might.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
The voice of Hondo Ohnaka, Jim Cummings, has said recently as San Diego Comic-Con 2025 that he believes the Hondo will be back. Now, we don't know where that could be. It might be in next year's Maul Shadow Lord. Quite possibly, it could be in the additions to Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. We know there's some Mandalorian-related stuff coming to that to tie in with the film next May. But, Mark, what do you think, or where do you think we could see Hondo? Because he is one of those characters, long-lived quite clearly, that has floated around different areas of the timeline. He's been around in the Clone Wars era. He's in Smuggler's Run, which is sort of the sequel trilogy era. So he's been around for a good chunk of time. Don't know what the longevity on a Weequay is, but it's not exactly like he's going to get aged by the sun, is it, with a face like that? So where do you think Hondo's coming back?
I think he may show up in Shadow Lord, but I hope he turns up in season 2 of Ahsoka. And I think the reason for that is when we look at Ahsoka season 1 and we kind of go, oh, it's kind of like, Rebels season 5 or something. You just kind of feel like surely Filoni's going to be like, let's just stick him in. And that would be kind of fun. That would be really cool to see a live action Hondo Ohnaka. I think that would be cool.
I agree. I think there's room for him in there. Look, Ahsoka's a great choice, actually, because season 1 of the show was visually fantastic. The action was great. There's some really memorable big moments in that season, and hopefully season 2 does more of that. But it wasn't particularly humorous in the way that Rebels had humor and Clone Wars had humor in places, but Ahsoka didn't really have that. And I think it could stand to have a little bit of irreverence thrown in there. And there's little characters or few characters more irreverent than Hondo Ohnaka.
Absolutely.
Really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think you're 100% correct. It could just do with lightening the tone a little bit, and especially contrast to Ahsoka and the tone of some of the other characters in that season.
Hi, this is Ashley Eckstein, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
We have some listeners' questions.
Ooh.
Do you want to read the first one out?
Yeah, I can do that, Mark. I can do that quite happily. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yes, we have got some listeners' questions. The first question comes all the way from Australia. It's from Adam Harris of My Saga fame. And the question is, it's a simple one, but it's one worth thinking about. If you could only watch one Star Wars movie or show forever, which one would it be?
So this isn't like on a desert island or anything like that?
No, you delete everything else and there's one thing left. It's the only thing you can watch. What would it be?
I think it's got to be A New Hope. And it's the reason why it's probably my favourite is because narratively speaking, it's got a start, middle and an end. It doesn't obviously run on, but it ends in a neat bow But yeah, there's a couple of right story threads that you could sit and wonder and speculate about. But yeah, I would say New Hope.
Weirdly, whilst Empire is my favourite film, that's why this is a clever question, because he's not asking what's your favourite film.
No.
He's asking which one would you watch forever if you could only watch one film. And Star Wars was definitely smartly made so that if you'd never seen anything beyond the medal ceremony on Yavin, you'd probably still consider Star Wars a classic.
Yeah.
Whereas everything else is so multi-layered and woven into everything else. He does say show as well. So I might be greedy and say the Clone Wars because there's 7 seasons of that.
Yeah, that's...
But it feels like a cheat. I will agree with you, actually. I will pick my second favourite Star Wars film and say A New Hope because it does work as a thing that's on its own. And goodness knows, you and me between us have probably seen that film 1,000 times.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We know it's got the repeatability and the rewatchability and every little X factor you could want. So, yeah, I think we're agreeing on that one. I think A New Hope would be the answer. Thank you for that question, Adam. Next question. Are you ready?
Go on, then.
Barry Gingell, he is Anto Krieger in Andor Season 1. He's part of the graphics department for the productions, and he has a very good question. Why did none of the Andor actors get an Emmy nomination? Forrest Whitaker did as a guest star in Season 2, but the lead actors I think he's referring to, and he says, I think Genevieve O'Reilly was definitely up there. So why do you think it was, beyond the fact that the people who pick these things are idiots, why do you think it was that Genevieve O'Reilly and Stellan Skarsgård and Diego Luna and all those guys didn't get a nomination when if you're in the White Lotus and you pick up a cup of coffee and take a swig, it seems you probably get nominated for something.
Yeah, it's true there, isn't it? Is this kind of curse of Star Wars and maybe the franchise, perhaps? I mean, because some of those acting performances, like Stellan Skarsgård and Denise Gough, absolutely. I think some of those performances are well up there. So whether or not it's a case of it was more of an ensemble performance, which may be part of it. I mean, I was surprised that Forrest Whitaker got the nomination. Saw Gerrera in this show is absolutely freaking bonkers. Madder than a box of frog ladies, let alone anything else. You know, I was really surprised. It is a travesty. I mean, congratulations to everybody on Andor who did win, because that was fantastic. And they definitely should have won more awards. And acting is definitely one of them.
Yeah. Apart from the fact I've kind of shot down my own argument by saying I think there were so many good performances, maybe they cancelled themselves out.
There is that, yeah.
But then you get years where shows like Severance and White Lotus get 4 or 5 actors nominated. So maybe that's not the thing. I think there's a slight snobbery because it's science fiction, even though Andor feels like the least science fiction of anything Star Wars ever.
Mm.
But also, I do think there's probably something in what you say about the curse of Star Wars, because you go to ILM, for example. I know ILM isn't just Star Wars, but a couple of years ago at the Visual Effects Oscars, 4 out of the 5 nominations were ILM, the one that wasn't won it. And so you look at that and go, maybe the vote was split. But then you go back, you've got to go back to 2011 for Rango winning the animation Oscar. You've got to go back to 2006, 20 years next year until Dead Man's Chest. You look back to the 70s and the 80s and pretty much the whole span of that, right up to the mid-90s, it was ILM. Not every year, but most years, because they were that far ahead of everybody else. Now, we know they're not that far ahead of everybody else because the playing field is level because of the technology. But nevertheless, no wins in all that time, that doesn't seem right.
It feels like a snub. To your point, I've never sat down and did a detective work to work out X, Y, and Z. But like, I look at like a film like Jurassic World Rebirth. Obviously, like most motion picture films have multiple VFX vendors working on it. But yet sometimes you go, hang on a sec, some of that effects looks a little bit ropey and doesn't look quite as good. And at least to me anyway, I always think like the top tier stuff, which always looks really good, is ILM.
Yeah.
And some of the other stuff isn't so much. And sometimes it stands out, even in a film that's got ILM in it. There's parts of that film where you like the VFX just didn't quite work in the same way as maybe some of the other scenes. And there's a number of different reasons for that. It's crazy, isn't it, how this is? But I know from my little inside industry stuff and having to write award nomination pieces for myself that then get rewritten by somebody else. And it kind of comes down to slightly marketing and spin and everything else. It's how you present that nomination. Now, that is for something like the job that I do, which is very much hidden away from the audience. You don't necessarily notice a color grade unless it's either really terrible or so good that it detracts from the rest of the film. But something like acting, that, which is a main, you'd say it's a main focus of the whole thing. You can't tell me that in those however many hours of Andor, there wasn't one standout performance that was worthy of a nomination in an Emmy, because I call BS on that if you say that.
I completely agree. I think Barry completely agrees. I think of all the seasons to not have, forget the fact it's a Star Wars show. I think The Guardian this week voted it the best TV show of the year, which is incredibly high praise because there's been some great stuff this year. But for people like, and Barry mentioned Genevieve O'Reilly, is quite correct. That is one of those performances you put right up there. When is an actor, I think even Tony Gilroy said this, when are any of those actors going to get meaty character growth stuff like this ever again? They'll be lucky. And he wasn't saying that out of arrogance. It's the construction of the season. We talked about it last week. It's the construction of the season that allowed these stories to prosper the way they did. It's a terrible shame. So thank you, Barry. Great question. Absolutely great question. I know we riffed on it a little bit about ILM, but I am slightly biased in that regard. Final one from Martin Keeley. You might remember the name. He of Cantina and the Zoovium. Very good question, this. I hope we take this and give it all the seriousness that it deserves. When George Lucas sat down to write the first draft of The Star Wars, and he had no idea that it would become the cultural phenomenon that it has become, do you think at any time he thought to himself, but how do we get Constable Zuvio into this? So, it's 1974. George Lucas is writing early drafts of The Star Wars. He doesn't know the cultural phenomenon that's going to come over the next 50 plus years. He doesn't know that his creation is going to live in the zeitgeist forever and ever. But of course, understanding the nature of time and space, we do know that Constable Zuvio was somewhere in the back of his head. Now, step forward to The Force Awakens and all the things that happened there, the things that George might have changed, the things that he might have tweaked, the fact that he sold the company a couple of years before the film came out. Clearly, we know the spine of the film is actually the three frames that are what we saw of Constable Zuvio. So the question, what do you think?
Well, I think that's all we've got time for today in this week's episode of Making Tracks. If you've got a listener's question, and thank you to everybody who posed one this week, especially Barry and Adam. Oh, yeah, and Martin. Yeah, please send them in because we'd love to answer all your questions. So, Mr. Newbold, can you let everybody know how we can do that?
I certainly can, and here's how you can do it.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me doing for this episode, Mark.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much, Mr. Newbold. It's been fun as always, and I hope everybody else has had as much fun listening as we have had recording. If you're at Star Fury next weekend, make sure to say hello because me and Newbold, as well as a whole host of Fantas, are going to be there. Until next week, please stay safe, take care, and may the Force be with you.
You're a genius.